3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here to reassure you that our favorite skill, Blade Vortex, has survived the nerf apocalypse of patch 3.19. But even though BV itself wasn't touched, our build didn't make it out completely unscathed, and we'll need to move some things around to compensate for the global nerfs to defenses and mana reservation that will be affecting every build in the Lake of Kalandra League. And compared to some other builds, we certainly won't be making any huge sacrifices, so the cold conversion, Blade Vortex Elementalist into Occultist is still going to be a rock solid league starter with the potential to evolve into an S tier map blaster and boss killer. As with my previous guides and videos, the bulk of the actual guide is going to be in the notes section of the POB linked in the description below. The written guide will take you step by step from Act 1 to the endgame and beyond, while also highlighting the keys to the build, giving general tips for gearing, and more. The rest of the POB is set up to allow you to easily swap between the various phases of the build's evolution, so you'll always know what to look for next. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the specific ways that we're compensating for the nerfs in patch 3.19, and then I'll share some random thoughts and tips that I haven't had the chance to put in a video yet. And of course, I'll showcase some beautiful footage of BV blasting from Sentinel League. The first, and probably the biggest nerf that we need to deal with, is the shifting of spell suppression off of items and onto the passive tree. Taking advantage of the fact that we could reach 100% spell suppression with just 4 armor suffixes was a big part of what made the build feel so tanky on such a low budget. Now, we can only get to 64% from our items, leaving a 36% deficit to make up via the tree. Thankfully, we're not that far from a spell suppression cluster, so we'll grab the nodes around the instinct notable in the top right of the tree. These nodes, plus a 3 passive small cluster jewel with any of the 10% notables, gives us exactly the 36% we need for just 7 passive points. And having to spend these points isn't all bad, because the spell suppression mastery that grants critical strike chance equal to spell suppression chance is one of the most efficient sources of increased crit strike chance in the game. This is especially useful because of one of the other nerfs from patch 3.19 that our BV build is going to have to work around, the reduction to brittle ground. Next league, brittle ground will be nerfed to add just 2% base critical strike chance, down from 5%. To be honest, it was incredibly overpowered at 5%, to the extent that I even made a whole video about how broken it was back when it was first introduced in Arch Nemesis League. And so this change is entirely fair. Brittle ground will still be quite good even at 2%. There is one other issue though. Brittle ground is currently bugged. It's not benefiting from increases to effective non-damaging ailments. I say this is a bug because Shocked Ground and Scorched Ground both benefit from such increases, and Brittle Ground's effect can be decreased by monster modifiers and area mods in the simulacrum. So it seems likely that not benefiting from increases is unintended and will hopefully be fixed in the next patch. If the bug isn't fixed, then it might be worth getting Scorched Ground instead and using increased critical strike support to make up the difference. It's also a great idea to pick up a Hatred critical strike chance Watcher's Eye, but I suspect these will be more expensive next league with the nerf to brittle overall. The next global nerf that we need to deal with is the removal of the mana reservation efficiency mastery. This sounds quite scary at first, since our build relies heavily on a substantial amount of auras, but there's an extremely easy way to compensate for this at the cost of just a little bit of damage. Simply switch from the Herald buff effect nodes to the Herald reservation efficiency nodes, and you should make up nearly all the deficit from losing the mastery. It's important to remember that this build can function on very low unreserved mana, especially with minus mana cost ring crafts. So if you can even activate all of your auras, you're actually very close to having the build in a functional state. 1 or 2 corrupt jewels with a mana reservation implicit can be the difference between no mana and enough mana. Getting some increased maximum mana also helps quite a bit if you're just a little short. I recommend targeting rings with a max mana prefix, since ring prefixes are otherwise underwhelming until very high budget levels. Lastly, we need to talk about Defiance banner. The nerf to this skill isn't game breaking for us, but it's probably the most difficult one to completely counteract. We simply don't have easy access to other percentage increases to armor. As such, it's definitely worth considering dropping Defiance banner entirely, which would also be a way to compensate for the lost mana reservation mastery. But you'll have to decide for yourself how tanky you need to be. If you are committed to having just as much physical mitigation as the last league, the best place to pick up armor is cluster jewels. Large physical jewels, small armor jewels, and megalomaniacs all have some very nice notables that offer big percentage increases and other good bonuses. Another option is aiming for a determination aura effect eldritch implicit on your chest. We'd normally want to target hatred effect for the highly efficient damage boost, but determination also scales very well with aura effect due to its built-in more multiplier. Overall, the nerfs to defenses will cost us about 20 to 25% damage to counteract in order to feel just as tanky as we were in Arch Nemesis and Sentinel League. Fortunately, we certainly had plenty of damage to spare and are still well ahead of where we were before the buffs to BV's damage in patch 3.17. And since I was already popping off in Scourge League before those buffs hit, I have no hesitations about how Blade Vortex will fare as both a league starter and content crusher in the Lake of Kalandra League. That's enough about the nerfs though. Now, I want to share some general tips for getting the most from your BV that I just haven't had the chance to discuss in my previous videos. First, let's talk about Blizzard Crowns. It truly pains me to see the number of BV blasters who run around with these on their heads. The fact of the matter is, for almost all BV builds, a Blizzard Crown is worse than a helmet that has no implicit at all. BV has really poor effectiveness of added damage, and losing 10% penetration is a big deal. The only BV build that a Blizzard Crown would be good for would be an extremely min-maxed Omni build that for some reason didn't have any bonuses to skill gem levels. Only with an absurdly high level of Cold Pen and an absurdly low amount of base damage would Blizzard Crown's implicit be beneficial. I've personally never had it be the case where I imported someone into POB, removed the implicit from their helm, and saw them lose damage. So before you buy that pricey helmet, double check that you wouldn't be better off with just a basic base. You can do this easily in POB. Just copy and paste the implicit into the custom modifiers box on the configuration tab and see if your damage goes up or down. It's gonna go down. The next thing I want to briefly touch on is the existence of radius breakpoints at certain gem levels. At gem level 22 and again at gem level 29, Blade Vortex gets a +1 bonus to its radius. This is massive, since the only other way to get a bigger BV is to get increased AoE. And while increased AoE scales poorly, with exponentially diminishing returns, increased radius scales exponentially and acts as a more multiplier on all of your increases. I've already talked about how scaling gem levels is the best way to scale your damage since the buffs in patch 3.17, but it can also be one of the best ways to increase your AoE if you're close to a breakpoint. The thought I'd like to leave you with is a defense of my best girl, Alira. Alira truly is the bandit of choice for BV, even at extremely high budget levels, and I find it hard to contrive a scenario in which she wouldn't be. We don't need much mana regen, but we need more than none, and getting some extra base regen that can be increased by our power charges and arcane surge is hugely valuable. The resistance bonus is major as well, and would probably only be useless if you were using Omniscience, since being overcapped helps for surviving curses, Eldritch Altar downsides, and other penalties. Finally, the Crit Strike multi is extremely potent. It's one of the best ways to scale damage for the build overall, and the 20% she provides is the same amount we might get from 2 small passives. The only situation where I'd give up Alira for 2 passive skills would be if I was somehow massively overcapped in resistance with plenty of mana regen, and that resin mana couldn't be easily replaced by more useful mods, and I was exactly 2 passives away from a hugely important node or a jewel slot, and I couldn't afford to take those passives from anywhere else. Short of that, Alira is bae. That's all I got for this video. If any major changes are revealed in the patch notes, I'll post another update and a new POB as well. But no matter what happens, I pledge to find a way to make Blade Vortex one of the best builds in the Lake of Kalandra expansion. So be sure to check back here and check me out on Twitch in the link below, or stop by the Discord to say hey. And as always, stay painless.